Hello there, my name's Tim Walter. I'm a house healer and an alternative life coach. And today I'm going to be answering 3 questions that were left in the comment section from a video that was uploaded a week or so ago. These are about spiritual awakening, and the first one is about the main fear that people may find themselves encountering as they go through a quick spiritual awakening. More and more people are going through this process these days. The second one is about what's it like to be living with a spirit guide on a day-to-day basis. What are the sort of practicalities? What's that like? I'll talk to you about how it is with me living with my spirit guide. And the third one is all touching on the difference between a trance medium and something that is called a psychopomp. Now, you may have heard of a psychopomp. I hadn't heard of this until last week. But what it is a spirit of a person or a being, an animal perhaps, that actually is there to guide the soul of a person through the process into the afterworld when they pass over. So that's all coming up. So the first question comes in from Jill Smith, and I'll just read it here to you. She says, I had a very strong and powerful experience of awakening last year, which affected every aspect of me, and I knew I wasn't the only one feeling these energies. My concerns are for those without spiritual belief or those with a strong religious structure that may support them, that they might consider themselves to have a serious mental health problem, or they may encounter dark forces or even become possessed by spiritual entity as they go through their spiritual awakening. So this is a really good point from Jill. And as I was saying in the previous video, spiritual awakening can be quite a traumatic process. It can open us up pretty quickly, and more people are becoming subject to this sort of spiritual shock. The big fear, I think, of anybody that is suddenly finding the world to be a completely different place to what they thought it was, is not only the shock of this, the shock of the new, if you like, but it's actually the spiritual idea of possession, of being possessed. Now, of course, films like The Exorcist, way back in the 80s, scared the living daylights out of a lot of people, including myself, and really instilled this idea of possession. Now, I laugh, but I'm not. It's not a joking matter. Whether or not we use the label of a spirit possessing a person, or we simply say that somebody is suffering from a psychological personality disorder, it doesn't really matter. Now, of course it does to a professional, to a healthcare professional. Of course it matters. And of course it matters on a basis of one viewing one's life, right? But what I'm saying is that actually a personality disorder can be very, very, very similar in the way it manifests in a person to possession by a spirit. And really, in the house healing work that I do, and that I'm telling more and more people about, trying to share that information, we look at this as being a possession by a spirit, so a spirit in a person's energy field. That is not to say, and I'm just thinking about somebody I just did a report for recently, that is not to say that every time we come across a spirit in the energy field, it means there is a personality disorder. It's not as straightforward as that. Right, but when one opens up very, very quickly and is subject to huge influence from subtle energies suddenly, it is rather like being hung up to dry, sort of picked up by the shoulders, shaken around a bit, and everything, your whole perception of reality changes. Now, that doesn't really mean much to anybody that hasn't experienced it, but if you have even gone close to a spiritual awakening type experience, which can skirt near the symptoms of psychosis, then you'll know what I mean. Now, if I just briefly touch on when I was opening up some time ago, I was actually subject to anxiety attacks at the same time. Now, this was all part of the healing process that I was going through, and I had to learn from those anxiety attacks. Now, I was lucky that what would happen to me is that I would get these severe sometimes chronic feelings of paranoia. But these attacks would also be accompanied by an overwhelming desire to sleep, which is a bit odd. But that sleep really saved me going through it, because I would go to sleep straight away, and when I woke, the world was normal again. So whatever that was, and probably it was a chemical misbalance, it could have been a sugar-based misbalance, it was affecting my brain, it was affecting the way that I saw the world, and it put me into a state of anxiety, which was accompanied by paranoia. And but fortunately, fortunately, as I slept, that all sorted itself out again, so that when I awoke every time, although I felt a bit, shaken about, I was able to see the world more normally. Now, I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine where I was extremely concerned whether I was going mad or not. And that's really the feeling that you get what you can get when you're going through a spiritual awakening, is that you question your own sanity. And in fact, questioning your own sanity as you're going through this process is a really, really good state of mind to be in. Because if you're not, then you're carried away on, or you can be carried away on, the waves of supreme joyous energy or supremely depressing energy, very negative energy, depending really on your character type and your state of mind preceding this opening. So it takes us onto this aspect of possession. Usually when, in the old days, 10, 15 years ago, when people were experiencing a spiritual awakening, then usually they were doing it in accompaniment with a healing. It was an energy shift, a gentle energy shift. These days it's not. And if one is surrounded by quite low, negative, heavy energy, if one is subdued in one's life in terms of finding it quite a difficult struggle to get through life, maybe even struggling financially, struggling romantically, you just feel as though you're barely surviving, then as you open spiritually, the sort of energies that you're going to be attracting are fairly heavy and low energy beings. I'll use the word beings. This is where the law of attraction really kind of does come into play, because if we are in that state of anger, of depression, of fear being a major one that we touch on a lot on this channel, then these are the energies that come to us. These are the energies that will be magnified. These are the feelings that will be magnified within us as we open up. And we see the world as different, but jeepers, it's not a nice place, because it just fills us with this other stuff. And this is where anxiety attacks and this psychosis can really take hold, because the paranoia aspects of a psychotic episode can be very, very deeply ingrained. Okay, really, one can be open to the overwhelming aspect of another thought entity. In this sense, a thought form. We can encounter thought forms all the time, and we clear those in the house healing work. So they are very numerous. You're going to come across them a lot. We encounter them, and usually as a healthy individual, mentally stable, they don't have any effect. We may feel a little bit like inexplicably angry, or get really wound up about something that is a bit unusual for us to do so. And that could be a thought form sort of passing through or trying to get a bit of a grip. But if one is opening up and is susceptible and is feeling a little bit off balance mentally, emotionally, then these thought forms can take hold. They can embrace the individual. And that really is a form of possession. The individual, when one is subjected to it, is not going to be aware of this sort of feeling. That this is the whole point of the mind state, is that when one is in the mind state, you're in it. You think that the world is normal. One can be delusional and yet think that the world is normal. It's only the outside observer, a friend or somebody in the family, that will see that your behavior is not normal. You're not being yourself. You're not making sense. And that can be quite terrifying, quite scary for the other person, for the member of the family. But what we have to say is, for goodness sake, get professional help. Now, I know I deal with alternative energies, but in the first instance, I would always say, go to the allopathic, traditional, trained medical staff. Phone an ambulance if you have to phone an ambulance. Speak to somebody that can help you, that has been trained to deal with mental health issues. Don't try to help an individual on your own, or necessarily, I would say, but don't rely necessarily on alternative methods. Once the person has been once the person has started to be on the road to recovery, then alternative medicine type activities, alternative therapy perhaps, can be used alongside standard medicine, right? And the only advice that I would give, if you are dealing with somebody that is present with you and they are struggling in that way, don't ever lie to them. Don't ever think that by creating or going along with a fabrication of reality that you are going to help that person or make that person more willing and able to cooperate. Because actually, despite being on the verge of psychosis or in a delusional state, actually their perceptions of truth, non-truth, are actually very high. And you are in danger of even with the most mild-mannered person, usually, of creating some kind of confrontation, and that's the last thing you want to do. So all you need to do is to always just tell them the truth, never waver from the truth. If necessary, just explain the situation, describe exactly what is going on. That person will listen and understand, even in their disturbed state. But what they'll resonate with is the fact that you're trying to help, and you're trying to help them honestly. And if that includes saying you're going to phone somebody to get proper help, then tell them that. Okay? Bit of a heavy one, but there we go. The second question was actually about when we work with spirit on a structured, learned way, right? Now, my spirit guide, some of you will have seen other videos where my spirit guide actually comes to the fore, and usually these days I'm quite surprised as he comes through. Now, I want to talk about this because in a way it kind of goes along with that first point that we just talked about. Now, there's a big difference between a spiritual awakening, which is happening very fast, and one is being wrong-footed, if you like, as you start to open to the subtle energies. Very different process to exploring gently and gradually, one step at a time, into the roles of personal development, and which is a spiritual awakening in itself. Okay, so you can go along to a self-development class, you can go along to a medium. There are always groups at local spiritualist churches or individuals that are experienced. You'll figure out which one is for you. And you can go through, you'll have a good time. You'll have they'll go through exercises usually to develop your intuition. And that way, slowly but surely, gradually, you can learn the process to safely meet your spirit guide. Now, I did all that some years ago, and I worked with my spirit guide, who is basically Ascended Master Merlin. Now, when he came through, I won't go into details about that right now, about that whole process right now, because it's a fairly long story, as you might imagine. But when he came through, I refused to accept that he was who he said he was. He actually came through with a very heavy sense of gravitas, a very serious spirit, and was quite put out, actually, although very patient, was quite put out by the fact that I wasn't... I didn't recognise him. I didn't remember or have any recollection or any familiarity with any pre-life agreement that we would work together in this life. So it took a long time for him and me to learn to work together and to trust each other, me trusting him, allowing him to come into my energy, and I step back, he talks. and for him to understand that I was prepared to do that, So there's trust is what I mean by that on both sides. So now, here we are, several years on. Was it now? As Heather Jenkins asked, would I speak briefly about Merton when he introduced himself and what kind of things he gets up to in our household? I imagine your wife, she says, doesn't get very far in any argument before he makes an appearance. Well, he doesn't come through in any of those kind of discussions. These days, he's actually very far in the background. When I was learning to have my relationship with him, allowing him to come into my energy to a certain degree, learning to allow his words to come through me, it was a slightly different matter. There were some evenings, some years ago, where my sons or my wife, I'd be in conversation with them, fairly relaxed, and sure enough, Merton, I call him Merton rather than Merlin now, but Merton would come through and he would talk. And actually, the interesting thing about that was that he would be there for half an hour or so, chatting away and talking about things and giving guidance in some instances. The interesting thing is that when a spirit comes through and the medium is in trance, two things. The medium is often there listening to what is being said. And, I remember feeling like, oh, that's really interesting. That's an interesting thing. I wonder why he said that, blah-de-blah. So it's like having, it's absolutely like having somebody else in your own energy. But you're still there. You, me, Tim, is still there. But the other thing is, for the people in the room, when a spirit comes through a medium and that the energy not only of the spirit of the person, the energy not only of the person changes, but also the energy in the room changes. So it's a very, very strange thing. What used to happen with my family was that he would come through, we would chat for half an hour or so, as I say, and then he would leave. And I would actually then need persuading that something peculiar had happened, because I was not convinced for a long time that actually I was allowing another personality to come through. And I know it sounds daft, doesn't it? But this was my stubbornness. This was my cynicism, if you like. This was my lack of belief and lack of trust at that stage. And it was my sons and my wife and other people that actually persuaded me to say, no. When this happens, things change. This is not you. So beware that as you develop, and if you want to do trance mediumship and you develop into that trance mediumship stage, if you like, then quite a lot changes. On a day-to-day basis in my life, when I'm living here with my wife, he's way in the background. But as I said in another video, there's a feeling that he's always ready to make his presence felt. He doesn't always come through right into trance. We'll have a conversation. He's out there. He stays there rather than being here. I consult him a lot in relation to the house healing work. But that is not to say that you need to be a medium to do the house healing work, far from it. And obviously we'll talk about that in due course. Okay, so that was that. The last thing we want to touch on is a question from Lady Kepara Ank. Now, I'm sorry if I've said that wrong, but that's a really nice, really interesting name. She writes, can you explain the difference between someone who is a natural-born psychopomp versus a trance medium? Well, I've just described my experience of living day to day with this kind of mediumistic ability. I don't describe myself as a spirit medium. That's not the shingle that I put out for my work. It's not the sign I put out for my work. Because there are many better mediums out there than I am. And what I like doing is the house healing process. I like the dowsing. So But I've had experience of trance mediumship, and trance mediumship still occurs for me, particularly when I'm doing workshops or working one-to-one with clients. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that I have to do the old Edgar Cayce exercise of lying down and kind of looking as though I'm asleep and talking. I do have to go into a state of meditation if I'm here, but usually I've done that before I take a workshop and before I work with a client. So I've kind of primed, and I've asked his presence to be with me as required for the circumstance. Today I haven't actually meditated before I've done this video recording. Sometimes I do. Usually those are the videos where he comes through because I've asked him to. So although it can be a surprise when he comes through, there's a kind of a warning and an expectation. Typically, a trance medium will allow spirits to talk through them. There are various stages of mediumship. One of them is kind of clairvoyant mediumship, really, where the energy stays out and you can pick up information from. It's almost like working with somebody's energy field. But, you know, the departed will come through in that instance, and quite often they're standing behind the medium, and the medium will sense that their presence, and then you can see images and talk to the client about what's being shown you from spirit. That's one type of mediumship. Trance mediumship is allowing the energy of a person, usually one spirit guide. With me, it's always Merthen. He is the only energy that I allow to come through and talk. But a good spirit medium will allow those spirits of the departed that are queuing up to speak to the group that are present. A good medium will allow them to come in and talk. So the medium will step back and allow their body to be used in a trance type mindset to relay information. And quite often what happens, and what really should happen with a good trance medium, is that the mannerisms of the departed are displayed in the medium. So the medium will very much demonstrate different characteristics of the person. Usually, obviously, if for example, it was my mother coming through, then I would expect to be able to recognise the characteristics of my mother, her speech patterns, and even maybe her physical behaviour sometimes in the trance medium. The other stage of mediumship, which isn't practiced very often at all now, because actually it's quite dangerous, is physical mediumship. And this is where the physical features of the medium take on the shape of the soul that they are speaking with. It is dangerous, and I don't think many mediums actually practice it anymore. Some do, and that's up to them. Okay, so this expression, this psychopomp, I had never heard of a psychopomp before this lady asked the question. I had to look it up. And what it says is a psychopomp is a guide whose primary function is to escort souls to the afterlife. The afterlife. So this is something that we know happens a lot. And this is what we expect when we pass over, when we step into the next world, to use that lovely expression, is that we are met by somebody, usually somebody we love, usually somebody we trust, usually somebody we recognise, but not always. Sometimes we're met by an animal, sometimes we're met by another spirit, sometimes we're met by an archangel. So Archangel Michael would be, in this instance, be seen as a psychopomp. Or perhaps if your dog came to meet you and greet you and take you through, then he or she would be the psychopomp. Now, if I was to pass soonish, then what I would expect is that I would meet my father, because I had a much better relationship with my father than I did with my mother. So I would expect to either meet my father or perhaps one of my grandmothers, and I would expect to meet their spirit. And in that case, the psychopomp is that spirit. So what I'm saying is that really, I would read the psychopomp as being a spirit that stays in spirit and does that specific action of assisting the soul to move between this dimension and the next world. What we know, or what appears to happen, is that there is very much a tunnel, a wormhole, if you like, a process of going through a vortex from this dimension into the next. And that appears to be guided from the other side more than it is from this side. But obviously, as we pass over, there is a natural process that our energy knows about and follows instinctively. But I think that that's the answer to that question. I think that's the difference between trance medium and psychopomp. I hope that has made some sense, and I hope it's answered the questions. There were 3 questions in there. This has been quite a long Monday Moments. If you've liked what we've talked about today, then we talk about all this sort of stuff, usually in relation to house healing, because that's what I'm into. And please do leave a comment, leave a question, click the thumbs up and click the bell icon, subscribe, get notified every time I upload a video, which usually it was Monday Moments we hope to get out on a Monday or a Tuesday. It may be that the Friday video is going to be every other week. I'm not sure. It is sitting more easily in my schedule every other week. So we'll see how all that goes. But do keep in touch. Do ask the questions. These have been particularly good questions, so thank you very much indeed for those. All right, now, take care. Bye-bye.